With the departure of Chief Strategist Steve Bannon from Donald Trump's administration, we'll be asking how his legacy has affected relations between the US and China. And after 3 activists in Hong Kong have been jailed for their part in the Occupy Central movement 3 years ago, is the New York Times really serious that they should be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. Another week, another Trump administration official gone. This time it's Steve Bannon, Trump's chief strategist and one of his most controversial advisors. The White House released a statement last Friday saying that Bannon and White House Chief of Staff John Kelly had mutually agreed that Friday would be Bannon's last day in his job. Bannon declared in an interview published last Wednesday that the U.S. is in an economic war with China, and he promised aggressive trade actions against China. What damage has Bannon done for China-US ties, and can his departure undo the harm? If what Bannon said in the interview is true, then what does that say about the US's policy-making process? We're happy to be joined in Washington, D.C. by Rick Dunham, a former president of the National Press Club, and in Beijing we have Mr. Zhao Hai, research fellow at the National Strategy Institute of Tsinghua University. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Rick, now Bannon was seen as one of the strongest critics of China. Last Wednesday, he said the U.S. is at economic war with China and promised aggressive trade sanctions against Beijing. How much has he influenced Trump's China policy?
I think he's influenced it a lot. He's influenced it in every way other than Donald Trump talking to President Xi Jinping. I mean, I think his departure is the best thing for China since Donald Trump met with President Xi Jinping in Florida. What's happened is that Bannon and his allies in the White House have been just repeating this drumbeat of going after China. You remember he has written in the past that he expects a war between the United States and China within 10 years. And within the White House, he was doing all that he could, and the administration, to push for trade sanctions. He's not the only person who's critical of China. The U.S. Trade Representative also historically has been critical of China trade practices, but Bannon just believes that China is a danger to the world, and that's different than anyone else in the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm. Now, Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Hua Chunying responded to a question related to Bannon just last week, a day before he was mutually agreed to be ousted from his job. Let's take a listen to what she said.
A trade war does not serve the interest of any party, as fighting a trade war will not produce a winner. We hope that the relevant persons can stop perceive an issue of the 21st century with the zero-sum mentality of the 19th or 20th century.
Zhao Hai, how do you look at this person that's called Steve Bannon? What kind of personality is he in front of your eyes?
I think Steve Bannon, in comparison with other advisors in the White House, they probably share, to a certain extent, about economic relationship between the United States and China. People like Secretary Wilbur Ross, like Gary Cohn, and like other people in the administration, they have the idea that the trade between U.S. and China is imbalanced and needs to do some work on it. However, Bannon's idea is based on a very strange and very specific ideology. Behind it, he believes that China and the United States will battle each other for the hegemony down the road, 25 to 30 years from now, which reminds me of a historical person named Ichihara Kanji. In the 1930s in Japan, he's also a strategist. He believed that Japan and the United States will fight an ultimate war down the road, like 30, 40 years, and he prepared it by recommending the Japanese to invade China's northeast. So I think, in a way, that they both share a certain religious belief that somehow the end of the day is coming, and also they need to the two great powers in the world need to fight things out. So I think this kind of zero-sum game idea is really the past century ideology.
What kind of damage when he can go on public radio and talk about China and the United States? We'll definitely have a war in the next couple of years. What kind of damage does this do to the perception of the general public in the United States about China, Rick?
Well, I think that he has less power right now to shape the perception of China. I think what he has a lot of power now on the outside.
He is now heading again the Breitbart, where he's be able to, voices of views unhindered.
Oh, exactly. But my point is, he will influence the minds of those who already believe that China is a threat. His biggest threat right now is to Donald Trump. If he criticizes what the administration does, he will be criticizing Trump to Trump's biggest supporters. And so Steve Bannon is not going to influence the people in the middle in America. He's not going to influence people on the left. His only real power is to push Trump to be more bellicose, because with the threat that he will damage Trump with Trump's base. I mean, I think, yes, he will be unfettered now, and he does believe in this zero-sum game that's very antiquated in world affairs. But I think that in terms of relations with China, he will be a rhetorical annoyance more than a real power.
Now, one of the most notorious legacies of Bannon is the initiation, as he claims, of the Section 301 of the 1974 Trade Act to investigate China's so-called trade practices. Now, China is strongly discontent with the probe, according to the latest response from the Ministry of Commerce. Now, Zhao Hai, from Bannon's personality, what can we say about the fallacy of this policy?
First of all, I think we don't have to over or exaggerate Bannon's status in the White House. I think ultimately it's President Trump. He's making the decision. He's his own man. I don't think Steve Bannon can behind the scene and pulling the strings and direct President to do this or that. I think fundamentally President Trump shared the idea with Bannon and also Peter Navarro that China is a threat economically to the United States. And this specific clause 301 trade investigation is coming out of this idea. That's why I think President Trump and also Secretary Wilbur Ross agreed to go along with this. Yeah. However, after Bannon gone, I think whether or not the outcome will be clear is still in question.
Yeah, Rick, what is your take on the near future now that he's gone? How much will this China threat rhetoric still influence the Trump administration's China policy?
I think there will be much less when it comes to the military or diplomatic China threat rhetoric. I do think that there are people within the administration who are critical on trade policy, so I still think you'll see some friction there. But a big difference is that the people that Bannon clashed with, Gary Cohn, the chief economic advisor, Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, are still there, and they will be the ones who will be talking to the president in person. Bannon will be doing it through his website, and so I think he will be less influential, but we're going to hear voices of American protectionism and American trade retaliation, whether he's there or not.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that strikes me when I read this report on the American progress, whether or not what Bannon claims is true or not, it seems that it's astonishing that the U.S.'s policy-making process is simplistic like that. I mean, this chief strategist can have such influence on the president, rolling out so many controversial policies. Is this really like this, the U.S. policymaking process, Rick?
No, the policymaking process is not like that at all. The Trump White House is exactly like that. But Donald Trump is not a policy expert. Donald Trump does not like in-depth, detailed discussions of policies. He's impulsive. He makes decisions often based on the last person he talks to, and Steve Bannon very frequently was that last person he talked to. So I don't think this says anything about the system of policy making in America, but I think it does say a huge amount about the White House. And Bannon was so important. China policy is just one piece of it, but almost everything with immigration and the wall with Mexico, you can just hear Steve Bannon talking to President Trump in the Oval Office on the cell phone.
But again, this is interesting. You say it's just the Trump administration. However, Trump is democratically elected, and Trump brought in Steve Bannon. Nobody said anything. He was given that job, and nobody could overrule that decision. Zhao Hai, really, how come that this person could be in that position for so long and pulling the strings, whether strongly or not so strongly, but he actually did had a great influence on the U.S.'s foreign policy.
Right. Remember, Steve Bannon came in very late. Until August last year, he joined the campaign of President Trump. And so far, he has only served Trump for only 1 year. Just like he said, he's going to serve relatively short term. But during this term, he exerted great influence on President Trump, particularly through a very clear structure of thinking. Like I said, Trump shared many views with him. However, Trump's idea is very wild, and Bannon has a very clear theory behind it. So that's why he's giving him, the structure of the thinking. Therefore, Trump is going one after another on the issues like Muslim ban, like the Mexican war, like mentioned, and also the economic sanctions on China.
Mm-hmm. Finally, this is also very interesting. Speaking of his love of war, Bannon's favorite book is said to be Sun Tzu's The Art of War, now a Chinese classic of military strategy. Rick, did he really understand the essence, or did he just read all warfare is based on deception?
Yes, I think he thought of some of the tactics. He missed the big picture, which really is that you're supposed to be able to win the war without fighting a battle. He loved the battle, and he loved the deception. But I don't think maybe he read the whole book, but I think he learned the wrong lessons.
Yeah, Zhao Hai, what is your reaction when you heard that, his favorite book is The Art of War? He's treating everything like, you win or I win. There's only one side that can win, basically.
Yeah, I agree with Rick. If he really cared about the book, or the lesson should be, the war should be won with as little as possible casualties. And if he's only interested in deception, he should read Gui Guzi or other books in ancient China. And I would recommend him to first read Confucius, because Confucius said, if we have friends coming from afar, isn't it joyful?
Well, thank you very much. On that note, we wrap up this section of our discussion. Rick Dunham, director of the Global Journalism Program and former president of the National Press Club, and Zhao Hai, research fellow at the National Strategy Institute of Tsinghua University. And here is my first point. If there is one thing that Americans like to lecture about other countries, it is on whether they have democratic institutions and democratically elected governments. But I rather feel this latest episode involving Steve Bannon rather begs the question of whether the U.S. is a democracy at all. Apart from the president himself, who of course wields an enormous amount of power, just how come Bannon, an unelected advisor, was able to decide single-handedly so much of America's foreign policy, thereby potentially affecting the lives of many millions of people? When America lectures China on its lack of democracy, they fail to understand that government officials in China will have to go through years, if not decades, of experience gained on the job before they could reach any leadership position. Trump's administration, or maybe the lack of administration, if one wants to put it simplistically, was based on a president with no political experience, being advised by a chief advisor with no political experience, plus extreme views. The world is well rid of Steve Bannon, but the likelihood is that it will be some time before the problems he created for the world will be put to rights. You're watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this.
CGTN shows you more, providing a fresh global voice you can trust.
And a different look at the world you won't find anywhere else.
We offer unparalleled coverage of Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
We present diverse perspectives on news and newsmakers from around the world.
We want to engage our viewers with stories that represent the complete picture.
We want to share with you ideas that matter to us all. The stories, the people, the issues.
A new and balanced perspective.
CGTN. See the difference.
Three activists of the 2014 Hong Kong Occupy Central movement were sentenced on Thursday to between 6 and 8 months in prison. Originally sentenced to community service and suspended jail terms, the three were then given the prison sentences by an appeals court 3 years after they illegally organized the largest protest ever held in the city. Meanwhile, a New York Times op-ed piece proposes that the three Hong Kong activists should be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, which has caused a huge controversy on the internet. What are the reasons behind the new verdict by the Appeals Court of Hong Kong, and what is behind the article in the New York Times? For more insight, I'm pleased to be joined from Hong Kong by Kam Man Foon, Council Member of the One Country, Two Systems Youth Forum, and also in Hong Kong by Chung Siu Wai, a Senior Lecturer from Hong Kong Baptist University. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Chung, now a lower court had previously avoided deterrent punishment for the three activists, citing their genuine wish to express their political ideals and concerns for society. But as I said, the Appeals Court of Hong Kong handed out harsher new sentences. Do the three persons deserve the punishment?
I think the sentences by the Appeals Court is within the legal framework. The sentencing guidelines starts from 8 to 10 months, and the three people who were sentenced this week were last week were actually reduced for 1 month and to 2 months for their sentencing, and because they have already completed the services, social services, and also because of the appeal has been raised by the Secretary for Justice. I think this sentence is within the legal framework and not extremely severe. Thinking about another case a few months ago, that the 7 Hong Kong policemen, they were also punished for their beating an activist during the Occupy movement. And during that period, these 7 policemen were sentenced for 2 years imprisonment, and they suffered even more because some of them will lose their retirement benefits, their pensions, and so on. So comparing to that sentence, I think all of them are within the legal framework, and according to the law, it's not very extreme.
Mr. Kam, many have accused the High Court of Hong Kong or the Appeals Court of Hong Kong of submitting to political interference. What is your take?
Actually, we have to make it clear that, of course, those three young people, they are the political figures in Hong Kong, but it doesn't mean that if we put them into jail, they are already a political prisoner. They have broken some laws in Hong Kong, which have the court, if we see the joint statement by the Hong Kong Barrister Association, also the Law Society of Hong Kong, the judge, the appeal court, only make the decision solely on law. So I think it's very clear that the appeal court just make the decision according to the law, but not any other political interference. It's very clear, I think.
Mr. Chong, there has been some protests against the verdict when they were announced. How much support do you think those protests have, and what are their main reasons?
I think the Hong Kong society is divided. Some of the people believed that the sentencing is too harsh, and yesterday we see some of the reports that the large demonstration for supporting these people. And in the meantime, there are more people probably who are silent on this issue. Still, they believe that the sentence is right. And some of the people even called for harsher sentences. I think the thing is, recently, particularly in the last several days, we see a tendency or a trend that people blaming the justice, the court systems, and calling for this sentence as a political persecution. I think the Chief Secretary, Carrie Lam, just had a press conference a few hours ago. She said it clearly that this is based on law. And according to the law, the people who broke the law and violated the law should be punished. And the Hong Kong judicial system has been strong and independent. And the court rulings are different from one another. The lower court might have this opinion according to the judge, and the appeals court may have another opinion. So this is natural, and you cannot call the court law system or the judicial system something like a political vehicle only because you do not agree with the verdict or the sentencing. I think this is something we should make it clear, that if you are not aware of the law, then that's another matter.
Initiators, namely the two professors and a reverend, what is happening to them? Why are we still waiting for the sentencing for their behavior in that Occupy Central movement?
I think their cases are pending. The police and the Secretary of Justice are pursuing the cases, and these cases have been first registered and then put to the court, and the court has them on order. And by now, some of the cases have been dealt with, and the other three people have not been dealt with because the court has several other cases before them. And I think the public is quite anxious to know how much they would be punished for this, or what kind of punishment, if any, they would get, because these people are more mature, they are professionals, and they have their jobs, and they initiated this movement. And now some of the people in the public saying that they should be punished more severely than the young people, because these young people were led by these people who have political experience and have political strategies. And so far, we have not seen the court making the date for their cases to appear in the court yet. Yeah. However, this will be dealt with accordingly.
Mr. Kam, on Thursday, the New York Times staff editor and writer Barry Weiss suggested in an article that the three activists should be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Many Hong Kong people, however, regard this as a joke. What is your take on this story?
Yeah, actually, I think most of the Hong Kong people think this is just a joke, because, you know, the writer compared those three young people with Aung San Suu Kyi or something like that. But we have to make sure that they are not political prisoners. They are not put into the jail because of their political view. They are because of they break some law in Hong Kong. For example, the unlawful assembly, or they are to incite violence in Hong Kong. That's why it's very it's not right to nominate them to the Nobel Prize. It's not. I don't see any ground to promote this. And also, one more thing I would like to remind everyone that in the whole justice process, the Secretary for Justice, he's from Hong Kong. The judge from the appeal court, he's from Hong Kong. And everyone, and all the law is from Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, we are doing one country, two system. And the whole justice process are doing by Hong Kong people. I don't think there is any ground or right for the New York Times or American media to comment this justice process.
Finally, Mr. Chong, in your view, if the same kind of protests were to happen in the future, would a violent parade be the end result again?
I don't think this could happen as we see before. It might be very radical, and somehow the people might take some special actions. However, the objective of all these protests should be peaceful and to change the system and within the legal framework. It is very difficult for people to imagine that if you have a noble idea and in order to realize your noble goal, you can do something which is against the law, which is against the common interest of the people in that territory. So in that case, I don't think this would be habitable.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Kam Man-Foon, Council Member of the One Country, Two Systems Youth Forum, and Mr. Chong Siu-Wai, Senior Lecturer from Hong Kong Baptist University. And here is my last point. It's not a surprise to see such views in the Western media as the New York Times espouses. In the author's black and white view of the world, whoever advocates so-called freedom and democracy is worthy of a Nobel Peace Prize, irrespective of whether he or she does so through violence. And in the author's view, political rights appear more important than other rights, such as the right to a decent living. The author's focus is often on other parts of the world instead of on the so-called Western democracies, who can surely not escape criticism themselves. What a shame. And that's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow us on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN Live or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.